I mean, I can use that one if you want me to, but
circle training, and this is specifically the contract to close class. This will be a fairly abbreviated class compared to the others. And what we're going to specifically talk about today is what happens once you get a deal together and then all the way to closing. So what I have kind of handed you guys is 2 sheets of what is my team's closing plans. There's one for a buyer and one for a seller. And I will just briefly take you through each of these steps, kind of explain, what they are. Let's start with the seller closing plan. So the first thing is, if there is a home warranty and you are responsible for ordering the home warranty and you haven't already done so, you're going to need to order the home warranty with the service provider and put it in the buyer's name at closing. So most of the home warranty sites will have a login, and it's very easy to get a login. You just need to go to that company's site and set up an account, and then it's a very simple process. After you order the warranty, you will get an invoice. You'll need to print off a copy of that or save it to a hard drive, because it will be needed to be turned in with the contract to the title company and to our front desk. You're going to send a copy of the contract to your client and then complete a green sheet. Okay, and we do have a specific green sheet class for how to do that part. And then on the green sheet, you're going to have title companies, maybe 2. The reason being is that in our area, it is sort of common that the seller will use a title company and the buyer will use a title company. It's not 100% necessary. We're the only region that kind of does this. Most areas will just close with one title company. So I think that you just have to talk to your client about what they would want to do, or if you want to try to support our title company that we have, certainly you can always close your buyers with Chicago, even if the seller is closing somewhere else. It's really about choice between you and the client and what they want to do. And sometimes a seller may not give you a choice, such as if you do a foreclosure and you have the buyer into that deal, you may be dictated to where you have to close unless the buyer wants to pay for their own title insurance. All right, so you're going to need to get the title company's information of where you are going to be closing, and then change the status in MLS. Because if you're working with the selling side, you've got to enter the listing as pending. You have 3 physical days to get that done. So that is very important to mark it pending or backup or contingent, depending on your contract. At that point, you are ready to enter the contract into .loop and submit. Again, that's covered in .loop 101 on how to do the file compliance for your contracts. After that, you're going to want to send the entire contract to the title company and to the buyer's lender if the buyer's agent has not done that yet. This is something that I've learned, is that sometimes you do have to help the buyer's agent, especially if they don't know what they're doing, just to ensure that the deal moves forward at a pace it should be moving forward at. So I would call the lender first and just check and see, hey, we've got a seller that your borrower has made a contract on. Do you need a copy of that contract, or have you already received it? That's kind of how that call would go. You're going to then do your KW checklist. Actually, that's probably out of order, because that's all of these are done on the first day. Is that part of doing the green sheet and submitting into .loop is doing the contract checklist and just making sure you have all the paperwork needed to turn in on the file. And then there's just some smaller to-dos about getting a co-broker information sheet from MLS. That's part of the contract checklist. And just submitting the file and getting all that paperwork done. If this is a listing that you received by a referral and it's due another agent is in, like say you get a call from Colorado and they have a client they want to refer you here in Kansas City, it's just a courtesy that once you have the deal under contract, that then you just let them know that, hey, I've got the deal under contract, I'll keep you posted. Here's the purchase price and what we agreed to, and I'll kind of check in with you every couple weeks and just let you know how the deal is going. It's just nice to stay in communication.
Carolyn, what's sorry.
That's
So
okay.
broker info sheet, what do you mean?
On the contract checklist, the one of the things that you have to turn in is a copy of the agent ID and their office information.
So just the roster screenshot?
Yes, yeah, screenshot, or you can even print that as a PDF, save it to .loop. It's easier actually that way than to actually physically print it off and rescan it. So, yes.
Can I get that handout?
Oh, yes, actually, I'm here in large class today, so I'm making a handout, so we'll make a couple more copies.
How excited she was. That was cute. That was super cute.
Today?
Am I the last one to sign this? Or, okay. You're always the last. You told me this class doesn't too, Lisa.
It did. The same thing said too.
Hey, who wants a cookie?
Already.
Anybody? Cookie?
Okay.
More than me.
We should start it on the- There's two on there, so I don't know.
Did she just start?
Yeah, she just
Was
started.
she curious about how that was gonna? I know.
I'm gonna tell them why you do that.
Trying to hire one.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up a,
Worry about that later. Yeah.
Carol, did you start earlier or did we, is the sheet wrong? It says two.
At 1:30 down.
No, it says two on the calendar.
No, the calendar says 1:30. It's right in front of me.
So mine said two, so. We had this discussion this morning, what time it started.
Like time blocking is something I really struggle with, so I'm always like rechecking my calendar. I'm like, you just about threw a wrench in my day. Like, oh my gosh. Okay. All right, so we talked about that. When dates are known for the inspection, I just realized that this kind of cut off, but what that next one is when dates known, call seller to inform them of the inspection date. So that's just so that they can be out of the house. That is best practice. I know sometimes sellers like to hang around.
What do you do when they do that?
What, when they hang around as a buyer's agent? There's nothing you can do. I mean, I have when a seller has been a little more meddling than where I thought it would be more detrimental to the deal, is I've just kind of pulled them aside and said, my buyers are really super uncomfortable that, they're here and they would just really like to relax and, feel like the house belongs to them and have their inspector, do what they need to do. Do you mind just maybe hanging out in another room, or you want to go run an errand, or, do something like that?
Because my seller is best friends with my inspector now.
Who is my husband? Yeah, and that's just scripting with your clients about, hey, this is going to happen. If Mr. Seller, I'm going, you are going. The best practice is you're going to need to leave for the inspections. And if I'm told the inspection's at 9, I'm going to tell them to be out by 8:45, because a lot of inspectors do show up a little bit early so they can jump on the roof, and that way the buyer's not kind of waiting around, and you're not waiting around if you're the buyer's agent, just for things that they can do without you. So I usually try to tell them, like 8:45, and then I usually give a 3 to a 4 hour window depending on the size of the house. An average house in our price point of 170 to 225 is probably going to be a good 2 hours, maybe 2.5 at the very most. But I would say 3, and then if it's a larger home, you're going to have to allow more time. So if you're dealing with a luxury home that's 5,000 square feet or more, it's probably going to take 3 to 4 hours. So just have the seller kind of prepared for that stuff. One of the worst closings I ever went through was because the seller stayed at the closing, And what I did not know was the seller and the buyer exchanged phone numbers. And then this happened over a holiday weekend. So we did the inspections on a Wednesday before Thanksgiving. My buyer was then traveling and seeing family and then going back to Colorado. So I just kind of didn't assume they were even going to have a chance to look at their email, look at the report, or if they did, we weren't going to talk about it over the holiday weekend. Well, the listing agent kept pressing me and pressing me and pressing me Saturday, Sunday, Monday about we need to know what's going on with the inspections. Well, I had written in a 21-day window. We're on day 5. And only because I didn't know if they were going to be able to make a flight back to Kansas City so quickly, and they were. But what ended up happening was the seller called the buyer direct and said, hey, our agent won't give us a copy of the inspection report, will you? And my buyer said, oh yeah, here, what's your email? And sent sent the seller the copy of the inspection report. And I didn't know it, and the other agent didn't know it until the other agent found out from her seller and then called me and read me the right act. And so I didn't know that all that had happened. And so at the end of it, I was just like, if your client hadn't even been at the house, this wouldn't have been a problem. But what had happened is they exchanged, it was acreage property, and my people were moving from Colorado. They coincidentally were moving to Colorado, and we had a 6-month closing, which everybody was okay with. And that they were exchanging things like equipment and mowers and skis and I don't know what, there was this craziness going on. There was a barn cat involved. And and so, but they had made friends and kind of just started negotiating without the agent, and the agent that I was in this co-op with was not happy about that. And I mean, yes, it was uncomfortable, it wasn't the right thing, but she definitely took it personal. And I did eventually get an apology out of her for her reaction because it was pretty strong. But when I called my buyer and I'm like, stop it. And he's like, I paid for that report. I can do whatever I want with it. And I was like, yes, you can. You're just making my life difficult. Please stop it. So it closed. It was all fine. We all moved on. All right. So then after the inspections, you're going to make sure that that seller has the utilities on, especially if they're not living in the home. Make sure that the gas, water, everything's on, connected, so that the buyer can do those inspections. At that point, if you're creeping up on the 9th, 10th day or the last couple of days prior to the inspections and you haven't heard from the co-op agent, again, just be a good partner with that agent and just give them a call and just say, hey, we're on day 8 and I haven't heard from you on these inspections. Is your buyer intend to do inspections, or are you guys going to waive that? Because what's worse is if you don't say anything and then we get to day 10 and your sellers are all excited because they think they're off the hook, and then the co-op agent calls you with an emergency. Oh, something happened, they didn't count the days right, and now you got to explain to a seller why it's better for them to extend their inspection period instead of giving the buyer the big finger, right? So, because the buyer can just back out for another reason later on. So it's just more uncomfortable. So I always think it's just good to work proactively through a deal, keep it together as best you can, and stand on principle when it's absolutely necessary, but just work with that co-op agent. You would want the same courtesy if you were that agent and something had happened and you lost that focus. Also through this process, I'm also kind of communicating with the lender, maybe not weekly, but at least right at the beginning. Do you need a copy of the contract or anything I can do to help you? Here's my contact information. Because as a listing agent, it's going to be your responsibility to do the appraisal appointment. And so I want to make sure that they have my contact information to contact me with the appraisal. And then once we do get through inspections, I might even tell that lender we're done with inspections, because the appraisal could probably likely be ordered. If it hasn't yet, it needs to be, so that we don't delay the deal, especially if it's only a 30-day close. Okay, then contact lender to check on appraisal status. And then when the appraisal does happen, again, best practice for your sellers is to show up, meet the appraiser, and hand them a copy of any recent improvements that the seller has done maybe just a quick one-page summary of the comparables that you used, and anything else that you think would be helpful, especially if you may be concerned about the value of the home. Like if you look at the comps and it's not black and white, that, you know, the purchase price is supportable through the closings that have happened in that neighborhood. I always think just going, meeting that appraiser, shaking their hand, and handing them, here's a list of improvements, here's my comps, here's what I was thinking, do you need any help, how's it looking, and then, you know, do you see any concerns? And again, it might just, if anything, it wards off the appraiser just sending a nasty report and not communicating with you. It puts a face behind the deal. And whether that's you or an assistant or, you know, buyer's aide or somebody on your team, you know, whatever that means, for me, I just go and meet them. It's a 10-minute appointment. I don't have to stay for the whole time. I just go, open the door, hand this off. Every time I don't do that, I regret it. It just keeps things together. When the market gets better and we have more supportable comparables, then I'll probably go back to just, here, EG, how about Yabax? Great, just go, you know, and then call the seller and let them know when that appointment is. I still think it's best practice to have that seller out of the house for the appraisal. If you've got a seller nagging that appraiser, nagging, although it's not supposed to factor in, it could. It could factor into his report. So, okay. So, that will help. Then, once we get through the appraisal, check and make sure that the appraisal came in okay.
I need a highlighter for that one.
Yeah. Yes, those of us have been through those problems know.
As the selling agent, listing agent, are you supposed to get a copy of that appraisal?
No. No, that is the buyer's appraisal, and only they can authorize that a copy being released. So have this conversation with your seller, because when you call the seller and say, hey, the appraisal come in, they're always going to want to know, well, what did it come in for? I don't care if it came in for the purchase price. I always tell them, you know what, I don't know. Because as soon as you give them a price, they're second guessing the deal that they just made. So I just say it came in as acceptable. That's all we're allowed to really know.
And that's hopefully all you know.
It's hopefully all I know.
Might not be doing their job.
Right, exactly, yes. I just had a lender themselves email me and say, because I called to check on the appraisal last week, she sent me an email and said, oh yeah, it came in for the purchase price and, you know, everything's great. You know, and it's like, oh, I wish you hadn't told me that. But all I need is it's okay. No conditions, it's approved. That's all I need to know. And you know, and for a buyer, it's also good language that when you kind of go over the contract or when we get to that process, to let that buyer know that the lender's appraiser isn't always looking for true value. In my opinion, they should be, but it doesn't always work out that way. They'll look at the contract and just try to support that price and maybe a smidge more. It is very rare, and it happens a couple times to me in a year, where I actually feel like, wow, yeah, we got a deal on that, and they actually appraised it for what I think the house should be worth. You know, where there's a gap between what the purchase price is and what the value is. Now, as the market accelerates, we might go back to those days where they, you know, the appraisals come in higher, but right now I'm still seeing appraisals hug real close to that contract price. So maybe 1,000 or 2 more, that's about it. Also, if the appraiser comes in low, then, you know, as a seller's agent, first thing I want is to see a copy of that report. So I'm going to want to try to work with the co-op agent and the lender together to, you know, try to see what happened. I've had it happen where an appraiser has misread a contract and thought that, you know, a digit was a different digit and appraised it to what he thought the contract price was. So he thought he was doing a good thing. Oh, I appraised it for your contract price. I know you didn't. Your facts must have been fuzzy because that's not the number. And I've also had it where an appraiser doing the same thing looked at the original contract and not the counter. And I had a short sale just a couple months ago where we had a contract, a counter, an amendment, and another amendment as we worked our way through the short sale and countering with the bank that was coming in very hard and strong on the price. And he didn't look at the last amendment. He looked at the original contract, which was our crappy offer on a short sale, and appraised it there. and there wasn't even comps to support that. He went back 1 year to find a distress sale in the same neighborhood to support our original offer price, as opposed to what our actual sales price was, or even what the true value of the house was. When the lender caught it and questioned him, and within 1 hour, he amended the report by $9,000. But that still didn't help me.
I'm sorry, was this recently?
Yes, Skiles?
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yes. It was very recently.
Angie was involved.
And I sent a nice, strongly worded letter to the appraiser, and you know what? I got it up. So it was pretty cool. It was like 29 grand overall that I got him up on value. Just, you know, like if you really look at the comps, here's where it's at. This house isn't distressed as much as a normal short sale would be. Had a new roof, it had been freshly painted, you know, there was, you know, the sellers weren't as desolate as maybe the average short sale seller would be. So they really tried to make the house sell. So anyway, yeah.
Does the appraiser take into account how many, like, thousands of dollars are being paid in closing costs by that seller?
It does factor in, but not necessarily 100% into the value. If you are getting, you know, closing costs, it's not like then that they're only trying to validate that much. But what they're looking at is if you don't have closing costs paid and you're paying over, and the other sales are under and they're paying closing costs, that's when it would probably more hurt you. But the fact that there are closing costs, I've never seen an appraiser just take that and give value to that. It's more like market trend. So to an appraiser, if people are offering incentives and paying closing costs, that is an incentive to get somebody to do something. So suddenly if you're overpaying for something without an incentive, where did that come from? Like if the market is trending here and you're now pushing it up here. I've also had an appraiser 3 years ago under appraise based on the last sale in the neighborhood and not based off of square foot. Totally screwed up a $400,000 deal for me. And it was a smaller home by probably 1,800 square feet. And our home had been devastated by a tornado and rebuilt. And built to like pretty good standards, like modern colors and, you know, wallpaper already removed and all the brass already taken out. And the house that he held us accountable for was a reverse ranch. We had a 1.5 story with a full finished apartment, kitchen, separate AC, garage, like, you know, it was just an enormous house. And we could not pull the appraiser up. He would not come off of that reverse that had sold that was less square foot, even though on the adjusted per square foot, our value was over our contract price. But he would not give us that value based on the sales, the condition of the sales in the neighborhood and what the last highest price was. And so my seller, we didn't end up getting the deal together, and my seller got so discouraged that they took the house off the market and made a complaint with the state, with the appraiser department. And I never really heard what happened after that. But it was a tragedy that I just felt like it was just malpractice, really.
Can you request a second appraisal?
Well, here's the thing. The buyer has to agree to that because it's their money, technically, or the seller could agree to pay for it, but then you got to get the lender involved as well.
Right.
If it's an FHA appraisal, you're kind of stuck
Yeah,
with it.
I know
You know, it sits. So when you have an FHA appraisal, it's going to sit with the house for, is it 3 or 6? 6 months.
It does that on Fannie and Freddie too.
Fannie and Freddie.
120 days.
120 days. So, so you can't go in and, the only thing you can do is go in to the original appraiser and try to get it corrected. And I just had that happen to me a couple weeks ago with a new construction home, and it didn't appraise. And so I pulled a comp from, you know, the last time we sold that exact same size at, you know, $7 grand more, and I got him to raise it. But if not, then I'm stuck with that appraisal for 6 months. Like if that deal falls apart, another FHA buyer comes, there's a case number assigned, they're gonna pull that address, that case number is gonna pull up when the lender, you know, goes in to order the appraisal, and sure enough, there's the appraisal sitting right there, and you can't get it changed. Now if it's a conventional loan, And the lender will allow you to have a second appraisal opinion, you can do that, or the buyer may have to change lenders. And that's gonna slow down your deal, because you gotta start all over, and the buyer's gonna have to be willing to pay to do everything twice, you know, as far as credit app and appraisal fees. Now, the seller could offer to help them with that or pay for that. I've had a seller offer to do that because they just felt so strongly that, hey, let's just get another appraisal. But at the end of the day, the buyer just, and that was on my luxury house deal, the buyer just stood in the sand and said, no, this is what the appraiser said it was, because of course they wanted it for 40 grand less. So, you know, so they were gonna stand on principle and they would not work with us, they wouldn't cooperate with us in getting anything done. When you're working the buyer side and that happens to you, you really have to be cautious, because your buyers are going to feel a little betrayed if you're suddenly working to get the price of the house up to make the deal go through. So my script for that would be a little something like this. I will discuss this with them the night I sign, or the first time I go over contract paperwork with them. You know, I'll talk about the appraisal contingency and say, okay, you know, you're going to have a contingency that will allow you the opportunity to have an appraisal, and just make sure that the home is worth at least what you're paying for it. And to be honest with you, that's all an appraiser is really going to do for a bank. Okay, just know that it's not going to come in. If we think we get a good deal on a short sale and it's, you know, 300 in a 320 neighborhood, guess what? The appraisal is going to come in at 300. You know, that's just the way it works. In the event that that appraisal comes in low, the first thing we're going to do is we want to check and make sure it's a fair appraisal. So I'm gonna, you know, I'll call you, we're gonna talk about it, but I want to review that appraisal and make sure that they didn't forget to add a bedroom, that they didn't forget to add the square foot finished in the basement, that they, you know, used fair comparables, just to make sure that the appraiser didn't make a mistake. It can happen. Okay, so that's the first thing that I'm gonna do, and I'm gonna need your permission to do that, because I would rather, you know, make sure that it's fair before we go beat up a seller, you know, that their house isn't worth what we thought it was. Secondly, if the appraisal still comes in low, then of course you can just back right out. You know, you don't have to buy a house that's overpriced, but if you really want the house and you're in love with it, then you can pay the difference between the appraisal price and the contract price as an additional down payment on top of the down payment you had already promised the lender to pay.
How often does that happen? Does someone actually?
I've had a couple buyers do that, but typically this is what happens. If the appraisal fails, the seller comes down, the buyer comes up, you know, we alter maybe some closing costs paid up front if the buyer really wants the house, you know. And most buyers do. I mean, at that point, you're 3 weeks into being under contract when this stuff tends to happen, and they're already in love with it, they're committed, they just want to get it, they just want to get in there. And, you know, if you're just arguing over a couple of grand either way, I mean, usually the seller will come down as long as they have the room to do it, or the buyer will make an adjustment on closing costs or something. They'll come up with the money. It's not, you know, as long as you're not talking about tens of thousands of dollars, I think generally you can kind of maneuver a deal with something. I had this worst market that had a deal a few years ago in a multi-phased subdivision. And the subject house, my buyers, was at the back of a phase, let's call it phase 5, and it was like one of the last houses built in, but that same house went into phase 6 at a higher price point. They just had built on one of the lots they liked better in the smaller phase, so it was a little overbuilt for the phase it would be in. Like, let's say, for those of you that are familiar with Benson Place, it'd be like taking something that's in the back of Benson Place, which are bigger homes that sells for $350, and sticking it in the front of Benson Place, which typically sold between $180 and $250. So a house is a little out of place, but just a block away, there's the big ones. And the appraiser held it to the phase that it was sitting in standards, but also neglected to give us our finished basement space, omitted a bedroom. There were some things that were wrong with it. So we go in, and this is how I learned the script that you gotta tell your buyer you're going to go fight the appraiser, is that he took a very large offense that we were working to bring the value up. He didn't see it as correcting the appraisal. He saw it as we were just trying to get paid. So we had a big, long conversation about that. The seller had built the house, I don't know, let's call it $350. The appraisal comes in at $320. It was like a 30 grand loss. So we thought, we couldn't get the appraiser to move. He came up like maybe $5 grand. And I thought, okay, the deal's done. The sellers come down. They had their eye on a foreclosure because they were moving up into the $500,000-$600,000 range. That would have saved them over $100,000 on the purchase price if they were to rebuild the house. So they didn't really care about the extra 20-some grand. They just wanted to move on and go get this bigger prize. So we were blessed. But in the process of that, we did, like, they were going to leave pool table and bar stools and, you know, all of this stuff in this really fancy big theater chair that they were going to leave for the buyer, and they took all that away in order to do the deal, which I think was still fair, that my buyer is still getting a fabulous deal. There was no way they would find another house for that price point anywhere. So, and I know because we've looked a lot. And so we get to closing, and I'm like, okay, so, you know, wow, we're here, we're closing, and we've got this great house for this great money. And he's like, this isn't great. I said, why is that? And he said, well, because I'm paying appraisal price for this house in a bad market. And he was mad. He's like, I don't want to hear it. I was like, okay. So just keep signing and just move on with my life. so it was kind of that experience that taught me you really got to have good conversations with your buyers. And you think you're doing the right thing and trying to get them in the house that they want, but they may be thinking something just completely, totally different. So, and it's through having experiences like that that will make you a better agent. You know, you'll get stronger. You'll learn, you know, what to do and what not to do, and you have to go through some of that. You know, I can tell you all my stories. Danny can tell you stories. We can all tell you stories about, you know, all these deals that we've suffered through. But until you have that experience yourself, then that's when it rings home, and you start coming with authority when you're talking to your buyers and your sellers. Hey, I've been through this. This is how we're going to deal with this, and they'll respect that because you'll have a good talk. So embrace the crazy and learn from it and be stronger because of it. Okay. All right. So that's enough on appraisals. Whew. All right. So then hopefully we get a loan commitment, and then with the loan commitment, we're going to, the title company is going to start working what we call a HUD statement. I think we've all seen a few of those, especially in real estate school if you're newer, and you know where it has all the settlement costs between the buyer and the seller. As the listing agent, I want to make sure that my seller's, you know, payoff is what we were expecting, that any, you know, commission charges are accurate. I've had that happen. And somebody in the office had that happen a couple of years ago where they didn't check that HUD statement and it shorted the listing commission. It closed, paid out before she realized it, had to go back to the seller direct in order to collect the balance of that commission. And it was very uncomfortable, and the seller was not pleased, even though it was fair. Just, you know, so check that before you get to the closing table. You know, just kind of take a look at the net proceeds. And next week I am teaching how to do net proceeds. And you can generally get, once you master it, you can get within a couple $100 typically, except for the payoff. Sometimes that's not always what they say it is, or, you know, there's a discrepancy there, but you can get really darn close. So I always just want to check to make sure, is that what we were expecting? Okay, yeah, it looks good. And then, you know, kind of move forward. Things like home warranties, you know, that would be on that HUD statement. Make sure that's on there so you don't have a problem. I've had that happen before where something got missed and we had to go back later and pay for the home warranty because it didn't come out of closing proceeds. Then after the HUD statement is reviewed, you're also going to need to be making key arrangements with the buyer's agent and probably a final walkthrough appointment if they want one for the buyer. And again, I always tell my seller to get out of the way. Just let them come in, do the walkthrough, won't take long. They'll just check repairs. If you have receipts or statements from any repairs that were done. And the other thing, and I don't think is on this checklist, is checking over the title commitment. It's probably a little more important as a buyer's agent, but you might add that on there and make sure that that title insurance gets reviewed, because you do get a schedule, and Kelsey teaches a great class on reviewing that title policy, just making sure everything's square, how to read for liens and past due taxes and stuff like that. All right, so then we're going to set those closing appointments. Sellers can always close a little early It's not as detrimental for them to be there the day of close, so sometimes if a seller's moving out of state especially, it's kind of nice to maybe have them come in advance and sign some paperwork. Seller closing is fairly quick, 15 minutes, Kelsey? Does that
Yeah,
sound?
15 minutes, maybe 20 if they really want to gap.
Yeah. So it's not like the buying side where it can take half hour to 45 minutes. It goes pretty quick. And then, of course, don't forget, after you do close, you're going to need to check your file compliance. And I'd probably actually do that right before it closes, so if there's any last-minute paperwork, you can get that to the title company to get initialed or signed or looked over.
You have this as day 10, is that, you suggest 10 days before close?
You know, my assistant does check file compliance. Like, she'll turn it in, and then, you know, Anita will type a list. But Anita is not going to be, like, looking at your file every day to go, hey, did Dawn get that inspection report in yet? Hey, did Dawn get that title commitment in yet? She's not going to look at it again until right before the date of close or as it's closing. So there's not, like, a great need other than your own just to, you know, check for paperwork that needs to be done throughout the process. So, you know, Ariel will check it once, and then maybe a week before close, just to see, hey, did we get everything in? Is everything dated? Is everything initialed? And then Anita will generally, you know, right before close send some sort of a, everything looks good, or here's what you need. And then, of course, the day of close, don't forget to enter in as sold in MLS. That is, for those people that are transferred from their offices, that is something our office does not provide. Is a front desk person to enter the solds and pending, so that is your responsibility, but what that's great about that is you get control of it. And you don't have to worry about fines if it gets missed or overlooked. Also, you'll want to make sure the co-op agent that you're working with, how would they like the sale to be reflected as sold? If you're putting it in their name, are they part of a team and they want it in a, you know, a team MLS ID? So it's just good communication. They should be communicating with you about that if they are a team. And then pick up, sign, and lockbox. I usually let the co-op agent pick up the key at walkthrough, unless I have a seller that's going to occupy the property after close for a short period of time, then I may not be comfortable with that. But if the sellers are kind of on their way out, they're half packed, I'll just say pick up the key the night before, you know, and then I'll come get the lockbox after it closes and the sign. A nice thing to do is if it's a listing and it was an agent referral, send the referring agent a thank you and let them know a check will be coming their way. You can send the co-op agent a note to say it was great to work with you. Invite them to coffee, maybe. Have them meet Brian someday. Work on your downline, I don't know. Change MLS status to sold. Create an envelope and label a copy. What that is, and I talked about this yesterday, I provide, every client that I close gets a copy of their HUD statements at the first of the year for their tax purposes. So what we do is go ahead and make an extra copy, create the label, stick it in an envelope, stick it in a drawer, and then all we have to do is stick on the stamp and put them all in the mail at the first of the year. So that's just that's what that is.
Yeah, I actually got one of those, and it was, I had moved, so I thought, I've got to find it. And in the mail, I got one, and I was like, this is so cool, so I'm going to make sure I do that.
Yeah, it's a really nice thing, and it's just a nice extra touch. And we just have a stock letter that, you know, I don't rewrite it every year, just said, you know, thanks for closing with us. We appreciated your business, and here's a copy for your convenience for your taxes, and please keep us in mind. So, the top producer notes in there are just adding a contact type to top producer. So of course, anytime I close a deal with a client, I want to make sure that they get in my 33 touch and that they you know, are in my database and grouped properly, comments put in. So we're going to update the database, that's what that means. And then sign the DA and collect the check. And then label the file and put it into dead filing. Okay. Now, throughout the process, I'm kind of a physical, like to see it in person. And yes, we have dot loop, and you can keep your files in dot loop, and that's absolutely fine. But I do like the ease and speed of having a file, but file folders and me don't get along. I don't like the little prong to things to keep things in order. So we came up with the notebook system. And there's some agents in the office that I've taught this to, and Elizabeth has taught this to, that use this. This is what I like. But you can do whatever you want. But I just thought if you guys wanted to see what it is, I use the same notebook and the same tabs. It's just as deals close, we just take the stuff out of the middle and then reuse the notebook. But I do print a spine that has an address and closing date on it. I had a builder make a special rack for me that these fit in. If you guys have ever been in my office and seen my notebook rack, you can, and it's, for me, it's kind of like a digital or a physical counterboard of what's the health of my business, right? How many closings do I have? What money am I going to be anticipating to coming in? And so when you come into my office, you can look at that. It's kind of an accountability for me. If that notebook rack is empty, you better tell me to step on the gas. Right? When you come in and you see it's full, you're like, woohoo! So, so anyway, so I have a color for sellers and I have a color for buyers. And the inside, I have the copy of the contract checklist. We do physically check that off. My assistant will then pick up the notebook and just review every time she comes in, you know, what's come in, if I've sent anything into her in email, if I've actually received or have a hand copy of something, I put it in the front so she knows this needs to be processed and put in the dot loop. Then the copy of the green sheet, actually I have to copy on green paper because it's the way I roll. And then we have everything tabbed, and the tabs are already pre-typed. And it just makes it easy to find something. So if you're in the heat of battle and you gotta know what the effective date on something is or what's the date of close, instead of having to get in the dot loop or pull up the file, I just pull the notebook, open it up, look at it, done. Now, I know that Ron had been using a system very much similar to this that Elizabeth had set up, and they are starting to go to all digital files. And they're getting away from the notebooks. That's easier for them. I don't know if I'll ever get to that place where I'll feel comfortable with that. I think you just got to do what works for you. If the digital stuff works great, that's awesome. If you need the physical file, great. This is a lot to, if you don't have a physical office here, this is a lot to carry around. You got to stack notebooks, so you got to be a little more mobile with it. So, sorry, did you ask me a question? Okay. But I just kind of wanted to show you what that looks like and just how it makes my life so much easier. So, all right.
Do you take the stuff out of the notebook after it's closed?
And
just file
everything
it,
comes
right?
out, goes in a file, and then it goes into debt filing. And then we do have it backed up on .loop. And then there's also one more thing that I do, is not only does she put the digital copies in .loop, she also puts them in a Dropbox file, so that all the active listings and the active contracts that we have are in Dropbox. That allows me the ability, especially if I'm at an open house, I've got my laptop and I don't have wireless access, I can just turn on a computer or a tablet and just go to the Dropbox folder and just see what I need to see very quickly. It doesn't require me to log into anything because those are, they're cloud storage, so it's going to download and save on my computer whether I'm hooked up to the internet or not. You can do the same thing on your phone or tablet, whatever you want to do. That's just how I function. I'm sure there's a lot of technology out there that you can make this as slick as you want. You can make this as old school as you would like. So I think you guys pick a system that you can maintain. I think that's the most important thing, is just having some sort of organization, a checklist. This is a action plan that you can actually put this action plan into your eEdge. There is an action plan widget in the eEdge product where this checklist can come in and the reminders come up as what you need to do. Now for the buyer's closing plan, it's going to be pretty much the same. What's going to be a little different is you should have control of the lender, so it's really your responsibility as the buyer's agent to make sure the lender gets copies. And I will tell you, never, never, ever send a lender inspection reports or any kind of condition statements unless you are asked, unless it's the only way the deal gets closed. So I just refrain from that. Every once in a while, you get the lender that wants to review those reports, and you and the buyer and the seller have already agreed that, house is in good shape, or the seller did some repairs, and then the bank will come back in behind you 3 days before close and decide, well, we were reading the inspection report and we really just don't like that the balcony is purple. So we just want you to paint that. I mean, that's fantasy, but that, you know, that's the only thing I can think of. So I just don't send them anything unless you're asked. Otherwise, they get everything, and so does the title company. Title company gets everything no matter what.
Sales price changes
Sales price changes.
due to inspections.
Yeah,
Sorry, question.
not always good on FHA. If you have, for instance, let's say you guys do inspections and the chimney ends up just being a train wreck, and the seller just doesn't want to mess with it because they never used the chimney, they lived there for 20 years, they don't feel responsible for it, and so they just, you know, they're not going to fix it. But if the buyer, you know, wants to fix it on their own, they can, so they'll reduce the price by $1,000. So you agree to that, write it on the resolution. Well, when the lender sees that you came down $1,000 because of a bad chimney, the lender's immediately going to have a little red flag go up that says, well, what the heck's wrong with that chimney? Because maybe it just needs to be fixed, because if the buyer doesn't do the repair and the house burns down, then we're holding the bag on a mortgage that, you know, the house is gone, right? Right, we have a bunch of dirt and some ash. So when you do a price reduction on a resolution, as opposed to just accepting the house as is and then doing a random price reduction, it just kind of, you know, just puts the lender on notice. And then once they get in there, they may ask for a lot of things. Or they may tell the appraiser to go check that out on the condition and see what they think. Why that's happening is because it was very common when I first got in the business that, oh, we don't like the condition of the house, seller would just be like, oh, we'll just pay $1,000 of your closing costs, or oh, we'll just do this and we'll just work it out in the money. And, okay, great. And then those people got foreclosed on, and guess what happened? Those things never got fixed. So now the lenders are sitting around with bad chimneys and bad roofs and bad foundations and bad, you know, bad whatever, electrical wiring that never got fixed because the buyer got an incentive at the 9th hour instead of the seller just going ahead and fixing it. So that's kind of how we got to where we are. With conventional mortgages, if it's a 20% down payment and the right lender, sometimes they won't worry about that. It's not such a problem. But I would check with your lender if you're controlling the buyer. You know what? Either way, I would check with the lender before you write it up that way and just make sure that they're copacetic with that. A good processor, you know, who's not the underwriter, will tell you what his underwriter will or will not accept, or what will throw up a flag. So they'll kind of help talk you through what's the best practice for that. I mean, if you really do have a bad roof, it's probably going to get called out on appraisal anyway. So really, Mr. Seller, guess what? I really just need you to fix that. So. Okay, as the buyer's agent, it's also going to be a responsibility to get the inspection scheduled and coordinate that between the buyer and you and the seller agent. Inform them of that inspection date. Also, sending utility information to the buyer is also very, very nice and to do. Just a quick list of here, you know, if it's, especially if the seller's kind of not put all the information on the seller's disclosure, just send them a quick list of here's the utility companies for the area, and just remind them that they're going to need to call maybe a week to 2 weeks in advance just to start those disconnect, reconnect orders, and maybe their forwarding address as well. Other than that, you're submitting the file just like normal. You are, you know, checking in with the lender, checking in on the loan commitment, reviewing the HUD statement when it eventually comes out, making key arrangements, so it'd be your job to schedule the walkthrough, and ask the listing agent, you know, how would they like things to be handled with the keys. And then, you know, pretty much doing your walkthrough, showing up at closing. And the walkthrough kind of looks like this. It really, I try to not let my buyer spend a lot of time there, because they're about to spend a lot of time there within 24 to 48 hours typically anyway. I don't need to witness it. So, well, it's just, you know, when you're standing there for an hour while they're placing furniture in their head, it's not the best use of my time. So I'll just tell them, like, what basically we're doing is we're gonna take 5 minutes and we're gonna run through this house and just make sure that nothing has been altered, there hasn't been any theft, damage, massive problems have come into the house since we have, you know, last been in it. And any resolution inspections that we ask to be completed, just double check them and just make sure to our best ability that they're done. Now, if it's something that your buyer or you would not be able to go, yep, that's a new microwave, right? You may need to have, you know, tell your buyer to bring their inspector back if they would like the confirmation of checking wiring or, you know, plumbing or things that, you know, maybe you can't see yourself that has been fixed. And then you're gonna show up at your closing and, you know, check that HUD statement very carefully. Again, for commission, with a buyer especially, because it's your responsibility to help them, make sure that earnest money is receipted and on the HUD statement. So I have had a closing, not with Kelsey, but I have had a closing with another title company where they just omitted, didn't even put down that the buyer had paid earnest and gave the buyer the amount to bring. The buyer really didn't know better and brought that much money, and I was reviewing the HUD statement because this one didn't come out until right when we got to closing, and I'm like, where's the $1,000? And so, you know, I don't know if it would have got caught eventually. Maybe it would have, but somewhere when they balanced a checkbook, the title company would have had extra $1,000 hanging out there. But anyway, so just kind of check that over, make sure the warranty's on there, make sure the commissions are accurate, purchase price is correct, and that they're getting their prorated taxes from the seller as well. Great title companies, mainstream title companies, going to have all that done for you, but it's just always good to have another set of eyes on it. Just double check it.
And also, there's a bonus that's offered on that, because a lot of times they won't catch that unless, you know, they give it up to this person or that person, so.
Yes, bonus and or an admin fee. You have an administrative commission. You have something like that added to your buyer agency. The only way that gets added in is if the title company and the lender are aware of it. So that's why it's important to send them copies of your buyer agency, because that's the only place that that's going to be mentioned, that you're due an additional commission if you're charging your buyer that fee, which is optional here at Keller Williams. For the newer agents in the room, it's not a requirement that you charge that. It's totally your choice, and it's probably 50-50. Some agents do and some agents don't in our office.
I had to get that added in a HUD statement one time,
Yeah,
because they forgot.
yeah, it's very common, yeah.
What about HOA fees? If there's a yearly fee, what's the common practice? Do you know, is that usually prorated at closing, even though it's been paid on January 1st?
It is going to be prorated, and it's going to be a credit back to the seller because the seller's paid for the year. So let's say the dues were due on January 1st, and it's now September 1st. Well, the seller is going to get 4 months of credit. Yeah, 4 months of credit for the dues that they already paid on behalf of the buyer. So they will get paid that back.
New people in here, if they have a property that has a propane tank,
Yeah.
you might want to bring that up.
My favorite
Sorry,
subject.
we want some propane.
That's my favorite subject. Yes, that is correct. It is pre-written into the contract that there is a propane prorate due. So you don't have to worry about writing that in. But what you do have to worry about is getting it read by the seller. And propane companies are getting more difficult about coming out and reading those tanks on behalf of the seller. So sometimes what we've been stressing out about is, you know, the title companies will want an amendment stating that the buyer agrees to the seller's prorate if they don't have a physical bill from the company showing what the reading is versus when the last time they filled it and how much was in it. So, so you'll have to have one little amendment at closing to do that. So,
Just in case, not that often, but.
Better safe than sorry.
yeah, and that doesn't come up very often in our area, but you get out in the sticks a little bit, and I've had 3 this year with propane.
Have you had any
Hmm?
Have you had any properties sold with septic?
Septic, yeah, let's talk about that. So with septic, if you're the buyer's agent, you need to make sure that those buyers are probably doing that septic inspection. It's very important. And depending on the county and entity that house sits in, they may require that the physical county or city be the ones to inspect that septic whenever there's a sale. I don't remember if it's Platte County or
They do that.
it's Platte that does that. So you can't just call any random inspector. I mean, you could, but to have it, it's going to have to be done by the county anyway. As a listing agent, it's common practice that the seller will pay to pump out the septic so that it's clean. So when they pull off the cap and look in there, that it's they can see it. It's not full of stuff. So have this conversation. If you're listing property with septic, you might have that conversation with the seller, like, hey, it would be nice if you clean up your own stuff. So it doesn't have to be that way. It is a negotiable item of who pays for that pumping, but typically the buyer's not going to want to do it. So
How does that work on some of these foreclosed properties, bank-owned properties?
in that situation, the buyer is going to have to bear the burden. The question was about foreclosure properties that have septic. How would that work? And probably propane too. I've never had a foreclosure with propane. Has anybody had that in the room? I don't know if it's written in their addendums.
I
Have
can't
you?
say that I've had one. I can't. I'm sure that I've closed on a property that was foreclosed on, that had a propane tank. I just don't think anybody was concerned about getting.
About the prorate. Yeah.
And I would guess that's because all the bills are always paid by the lender on foreclosed properties. Like, they don't want anything paid on the settlement statement, except commission.
Yeah, we bought a foreclosure and it had propane and septic. We were responsible for all of it.
For all of it. So you didn't have to prorate anything. Okay. We're very good.
Okay. Just check.
Yeah. Okay.
I had one on the homeowner association where they had forgotten the title company had forgotten to check to see if the homeowners association had been paid. They were 2 years past due, and when the buyer went to sign up with a homeowners association, they said they had to pay those two. The title company ended up having to write them a check to pay for it.
Did you call the title company?
What's that?
Did they call the title company?
Yeah, I said the title company ended up having to write them a check.
Oh,
to pay
okay,
for it.
I'm sorry, I thought you said the buyer.
Yeah, because I had called the
Okay.
title company, and I said it was on the, I said it was on the MLS.
That's right, that's
That there
what
was
we
an
do.
HOA, they should have checked that, and they didn't.
Yeah.
And
And
we're
so,
on the hook for that 100%.
so they ended up having to write a check to the buyer. The buyer
Which
thought
is
they were going to have to pay
why
it.
you want title insurance.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay. Any other questions about the flows, processes?
Is the listing agent, I would assume, who is responsible for telling the title company or, whoever prepares the HUD that there is a homeowners association fee?
Not necessarily. What you are going to give the title company is a copy of the disclosure, which will have the answer, hopefully the answer to that question. That'll put them on notice, number one. But number two, it is their responsibility to look, as when they do that title commitment, part of that commitment is doing a search against the legal description of that property to see if there are any liens held against it, and then typically to pay the prorate, and maybe you should just be answering this question.
You're doing great.
Okay, so typically to pay the prorate, the title company is then going to call the homeowners association to find out where that check gets sent, if there is anything due or not. So typically, it's not going to be your responsibility to go, hey, Chicago Title, this has an HOA. You don't have to do that. I mean, surely, would you welcome the communication? Sure, but you should not have to do that. Correct.
But we do love it when it's on the seller's disclosure and we already have the name of the treasurer and we already have the phone number to call. That just makes our life so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah, nothing's more frustrating, especially when you're the buyer's agent and your buyer wants to know a bunch of
Well, they want
information about the
houses.
HOA, and you can't find, the seller didn't fill that out, put in very little information, so
It
it's
still
nice.
happens.
Yeah, so when you're listing, make sure it's an HOA, make sure that seller puts that information in there. So.
I had one, my first one, we got to closing, and, you know, I'm looking at the HUD, and there's a $375 initiation fee into the HOA.
Yeah, that
we
should have
didn't
been on the
have
seller's
any
disclosure.
idea
Yeah.
About, you know, we knew the pool fee was $375, we knew the monthly was $101, but, you know, the seller had maybe forgotten that she paid a $375 initiation fee, which is totally understandable, but, you know, to get that and see that on the settlement statement. I mean, I'm used to like an initiation or like a transfer fee, $90 or something like that, but the $375 was kind of.
Wait till you sell a house in Lakewood area.
Hey, what's your name?
It's a $25,000 fee. $25,000 initiation fee to the homeowners association in Lakewood area for you.
Oh, in Lakewood.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, well, unless anybody has anything else, that's it.